Good evening, everybody. I'm Mark Halperin, your host for this hour, pour through everything. Thank you for joining. This is Two-Way Tonight. Please extend the presumption of grace to all throughout the program. Put your seat in a full upright and locked position, and do not put smack in the chat. If you're watching here on the Two-Way platform, you'd like to be in the conversation, as always, raise your hand. We'll get you in. If you're watching on X or YouTube, you only have one responsibility, already mentioned. Don't put smack in the chat. Two great guests today. One who's been here before, Ambassador Rufus Gifford, who was an ambassador to Denmark in the Biden administration and also served in senior roles in many presidential campaigns. He'll be with us, and making his two-way debut, Ben Smith of Semafor. He's the co-founder, editor-in-chief, and also the co-host of the podcast Mixed Signals. We'll talk to both of them in just a moment. Main news today involves the president's trip to Qatar, the Joe Biden book, which is getting much conversation, and I'm eager to talk to Ben and Rufus about, and some cats and dogs. And I'm going to do the cats and dogs first. Then we'll talk about the president's trip. Then we'll talk about Joe Biden. Our guests will be here in a moment. Thank you for being here. As widely predicted here and elsewhere, Putin said he's not going to Turkey. So that means Trump is not going and Zelensky's not going. So there will be talks in Ukraine, or about Ukraine and Russia in Turkey tomorrow, but the heads of government will not be there. We'll see what progress comes of that. Gavin Newsom today proposed cutting healthcare, government healthcare for illegal immigrants in California. People who are inclined to see everything Gavin Newsom does through the prism of whether he'll run for president in 2028 are sure to see this as another sign that he's trying to moderate his positions. New poll out today shows he's not particularly popular in California. I still don't believe it's a sure thing he's going to run, as I talked to him about the other day. The president of Harvard took a 25% pay cut amid all the government cuts there. And of course, as we should have noted this morning, it is Susie Wiles' birthday. Now, RFK. We'll talk a little bit more about this if we have time, but he spoke on Capitol Hill today and caused all sorts of disruptions and controversies. Let's just play number 9. You'll see a little bit of what happened when he was startled by the disruptions.
With less. The budget I'm presenting today supports these goals and reflects.
The witness will suspend. The committee will come to order. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individuals from the hearing room. Members of the audience are reminded disruptions will not be tolerated.
That's the Ben and Jerry's guy.
Yeah. I will say this about Bobby Kennedy.
Members of the audience are reminded disruptions will not be permitted while the committee conducts its business. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individuals from the hearing room.
All right. I don't read the chat, but I do glance at it. Somebody said Ben and Jerry's is overrated. True fact, except when it comes to Sherry Garcia, which is an extremely good flavor. Bobby Kennedy inspires just so much passion. His supporters in the Maha movement, people who oppose him for various things, his positions on all sorts of issues. Obviously, vaccines is one. And I continue to believe that no one in journalism has adequately and fully captured why he's just become such a resonant figure for his detractors and his supporters. And we'll talk about that perhaps with our guests in a moment. And lots of other stuff happened at the hearing. Okay, we're going to talk now about the president's trip and about the Biden book, because there's been more discussion of it today, including public appearances by one of the authors. So let's bring in our guests. As I said, one who's been here before, one not. Ben Smith, welcome in. Thank you for joining. We'll unmute you. And
thanks for having me.
And Rufus. Gentlemen, do you guys know each other?
By reputation.
By reputation. All right.
We do. Good to see you, Ben. Hey, Mark.
Welcome in. Welcome in. Very happy to have you both. You have very similar beatific smiles, which is good. You're kind of like a matched pair. So again, Rufus, tell folks what you do now.
Well, I just started a new business, honestly, after I was finance chair of the Harris-Walz campaign, the Biden-Harris campaign, then the Harris-Walz campaign. And then after the election, just tried to pick up the pieces, figuring out what's next. And just started a little firm to try to get back into the fight, Mark. So I'm back in it and slowly easing in. I consider myself at least partially on sabbatical until Labor Day, but starting to get back into the fight, which has been
All
fun.
right. Can you tell us a bit about what the firm will do?
Admit it, it's about how we navigate this moment in time. It's obviously unprecedented. So whether or not you are a private entity, look, I served in Europe, whether a European company looking to invest in the United States, how do you navigate things like everything from tariffs to new regulations that Trump may be putting on clean energy and whatever it may be. Whether you are a nonprofit or an individual or an American corporation looking for help to try to either navigate state or federal politics, we're here for you, and we want to help. So that's our ultimate goal right now.
So it's a for-profit firm whose clients would be nonprofits and corporations.
We
right?
we are not limited to any one entity. So honestly, we'll be doing a good bit of political work in addition to everything I just said. We're doing a lot of work in the states right now. Obviously, I'm a Democrat, focusing on blue states and what blue states can do in order to play defense against the Trump administration cuts, but also actually play some offense as well. So playing around with that a little bit.
Okay. And what's the company? Can you say what the company's name is?
Oh yeah, we're the Elrod Gifford Group. Adrian Elrod, you probably know Adrian.
Sure.
And I. I think we have between the two of us 10 presidential campaigns under our belt. So we started together.
And again, I've listened closely, but I'm still a little confused. Are you fighting the Trump administration politically, or you're helping companies and nonprofits navigate the legal and economic thicket?
It's the latter for the most part.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's also about really trying to help scale organizations that are just getting started right now. I mean, look, what I have more than anything else is a Rolodex that's pretty darn good, both politically and just sort of the chattering class, donor class of politics. So helping everybody try to, again, this is an unprecedented moment in American history, and I think people are trying to figure out what their place and role in it is right now. So that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. And will the firm have a physical location, or everybody's going to work remote?
Eventually, as we scale, we're like 3 weeks into this right now, Mark. Okay. So, but I'm actually outside Boston. Adrian's in DC. If we have an actual office to go to, it'll be in DC before long.
Got it. Okay. And Ben, again, for those who probably many of you know him because he's worked in journalism for a while, both at Politico and BuzzFeed, also New York Times.
Almost as long as you, Mark. When I was like getting on the bus, Mark was like the dominant blogger who we were all felt competitive with.
Ben, guess how many what number episode this is of Two Way Tonight? Guess how many we've done?
Hundreds? I don't know.
150 tonight. You gentlemen are
congratulations.
150th episode. Thank you. I'm surprised it's that many. It seems like only 140 to me. Again, Ben now is with Semafor, and Ben, for people who aren't familiar with Semafor, how do you differ? What's your lane in journalism?
I mean, I think we really are trying to be a kind of antidote to polarization. I mean, I think that's, I suspect that's like what a lot of people here are looking for. I think there's, the social media, and I was at BuzzFeed before, so I definitely kind of feel this very intensely. But like the pull of social media was to, was and is toward giving you stuff that portrays your enemies in the worst possible light and elevates your friends, and I think there are people who sort of, among other things, just kind of literally can't afford to just be kind of like professionally lied to all the time for entertainment purposes. And so I think we try to both separate facts from opinion and do a pretty decent job of trying to show our audience what different sides see of the same issue without trying to put our thumb on the scale.
And your content's available on social media, but largely on your website and through newsletters, right?
Newsletters, yep.
Yeah. So if people are interested in Semafor's content and they cover a range of topics. How many newsletters do you have now? About 10?
8.
8. Okay. So that's about 10. So you can subscribe to them. I subscribe to, I think, 4 of them.
That's a good number.
Ben also hosts a podcast called Mixed Signals. Tell people what that's about and when and where it's available, please.
So I covered media for the New York Times for a couple of years, and it's a podcast about media, and it's actually such a weird, interesting time. Again, as everyone on this show knows, because what even is this thing that we're participating in right now? It's this moment when podcasts are becoming television is becoming podcasts. It's all converging in really interesting, confusing ways, and I think we're trying. Yeah, and the show is really just about trying to figure that out with people who are navigating it. So we had like Piers Morgan on the other day, Ezra Klein, people who are figuring out this interesting convergence, I think, between old and new.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the president's trip. Again, Rufus was an ambassador, and both the keen observers of the concept of a presidential overseas trip. Just as you've observed it, Ambassador, you first. Has the president's trip so far been a success? Do you think by the White House's metrics of success?
Well, I think a couple of things, Mark, and I should say too, the most recent job I've had in government is what we call chief of protocol,
Yeah,
another ambassador rank job.
yeah,
So I actually coordinated these trips. So when President Biden went to the Middle East or anywhere in the world, we actually built those trips, built in the deliverables,
yeah.
because you're not going to go on a foreign trip without some wins.
Let me just ask you: did anybody ever offer him a plane as one of the deliverables?
Not only was it not offered, it would not have been accepted. But
Yeah, okay.
that's a larger conversation, which I'm sure we'll have in a bit. So I think there's a few things to unpack here. I think one, anytime you have you sign agreements with foreign nations, and it sounds like we're at least talking a couple hundred billions of dollars in defense contracts and whatnot, I think that's a win. I'm not one to give Donald Trump or the Trump administration a ton of credit, but I think these are good things. And anytime we're bringing that part of the world closer to us, with eyes wide open, though, I think it's a good thing. I think the geopolitics here, though, Mark, are extremely murky. And as someone who is enormously skeptical of the Trump administration, and as someone who has coordinated these trips before, I have a couple of comments. Like, to see him sit down with the new Syrian leader today, and I don't even know that it's a mistake. But I am certainly not confident that that was appropriately vetted. I mean, remember, this is a guy who I think no less than a couple of months ago, he had a bounty, an American bounty on his heads in the tens of millions of dollars. I mean, this guy is an avowed terrorist, and there he is sitting right next to the president of the United, or it has been at least designated terrorist, and here he is sitting next to the president of the United States. Frankly, that scares the hell out of me. And it does make me think that some of these trips are not scripted as much as they need to be and as much as they should be vis-a-vis America, just as it relates to American leadership generally.
Right.
And then I just don't think, look, you cannot separate the wins that I led with, because I do think it's important to look at this administration eyes wide open and acknowledge that they are bringing some of those relationships in the Middle East in particular closer to us. But the hangover here of things like the Qatari airplane, which is extraordinary. I used to oversee presidential gifts. I understand this a little bit. This is ridiculous, fundamentally ridiculous. That I also had to listen to frickin' people talk about Hunter Biden profiting off of things like Burisma in China for 4 years. And here we have the Trump administration going to these countries who have now, since January 20th, invested billions of dollars in things like the Trump family crypto entities. So this stuff is the geopolitics of this are extremely murky to me, despite some of those wins that I led with.
All right, that's a lot. Ben, I want to show you some video from today, but I'd love you to unmute and just pick up on any of the many points that Rufus made as you wish.
Yeah, I mean, I guess two things. One is that a big metric for Donald Trump, on whether something is a political success or not, is whether he's getting a lot of attention right now and controlling the narrative. And I think that for the first time, really in a while, like since Liberation Day, maybe, like he's back. And I think the White House is feeling great about being, surprising people and shocking people and telling a great story and doing stuff that no other president would do, including meeting al-Shara, who was the leader of Al-Qaeda, right? I mean, it's a really, but it's also, this is, a kind of foreign policy that Trump certainly ran on and persuaded people of, that the U.S. needed to be more focused on its interests, less moralizing, less cautious,
and being willing to meet with anybody. I mean, he's made it clear
and meet and talk to anybody. And you certainly did see today, like a lot of, I mean, I think one of the really interesting reactions today was you saw a lot of people who cautiously optimistic about the new Syria, saying, wow, Kamala Harris would have been afraid to do this. She would never have done it. Her advisors like Rufus would have told her there's risk here, and she would never have done something like this. And this was incredibly bold.
Right. All right. This trip is filled with crazy photo ops. Let's look at two. Number 6, please. This is the president watching a sword ceremony. I find all these photo ops to just be theatrically. So, Rufus, for an event like this, just take us inside. What kind of briefing would a president be given before something like that?
So every movement a president makes overseas is negotiated with our foreign counterparts. So very often, the administrations I worked in usually scaled down the pomp and circumstance as much as possible. We thought it was a relatively bad look for the president to be feted by some of these leaders. In all honesty, I was there standing right next to President Biden during the MBS very, very famous fist bump, which I could tell you the backstory of, which was just sloppy planning more than anything else. So the point is, in things like that, we're not scripted. Everything else is scripted. We know exactly what to expect. You know exactly where to stand. You know, it has been rehearsed literally dozens of times before the president gets there with stand-ins, including with the on the American side. Everything is orchestrated.
Would the president be told how long the performance is going to be?
Yeah. I know. Look, I can't speak to the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Doesn't have the same rules that every other.
But standardly, if he's going to watch a musically accompanied sword demonstration, they would say this is going to last 6 minutes or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I would tell you this, that the vast majority of the time, the American presidents and their teams, those ceremonies can be excruciatingly long. So we will do everything we possibly can to make them shorter without trying to piss off our host nation, which is the most important thing, not anger at the host nation.
That clip was 20 seconds and it felt way too long to me. Ben, look at this, number 5. This is a motorcade escorted by Arabs on horses chanting. I don't know if the Arabs are chanting or the horses, but we'll see. That's more than enough of that. All right, Ben.
That's Riyadh or that's?
No, that's in Qatar.
That's in
Qatar. Ben, what do you think of that? What do you think of that photo op, Ben?
I mean, it's amazing. It is also, it's a situation. These are tiny, tiny countries that are very new. I think Qatar from the 60s, early 70s, whose, in some sense, national identity's legitimacy is at stake at times. I mean, the Saudis were sort of muttering about taking Qatar over during Trump's first term. And so I do think part of the ritual, part of the pomp and circumstance is just, they are very, I mean, I think, there's a question about, do the Americans know what they're doing? I do think the Gulf leaders really do know what they're doing. In that case, they're saying like, hey, we are a real place. We're a real country. We have a culture. We have flags and horses and all that stuff that countries have. And you need, and so please, so take us seriously. We're not just like a family business with a big bank account, which is another way people sometimes see them.
Rufus, I want to ask you a question I thought about this morning that I think you'll be able to answer. All these Gulf states are planning these trips in consultation with Washington firms who they're paying for advice about what would Trump like, right? I don't know who the firms are in every case, but they're obviously there. Would anyone from a government, and I know you don't know what the Trump people would do, but for the administration you served in, would you ever call those firms and say, hey, would love to know like how those conversations are going, or is that not kosher? So, I say kosher with purpose.
When you're talking about folks who are perhaps full-time consultants to company,
let's just say someone from your advanced team called you and said, hey, we're in the Riyadh Ritz-Carlton, and there's a guy here from Black Manafort and Stone, and they're here, and they told us over drinks, if they can have drinks in the Ritz-Carlton, they told us over lemonade that they're advising the government, and they're probably advising them on how to outfox the president or suck up the president. Would you ever then call your friend at Black Manafort and Stone and say, hey, your guys are there, what's up? Like, what tell us about those conversations?
So without a doubt, I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, that started with these trips begin. And so when I was chief of protocol, you have So your ambassador rank. So the first person you call when these trips are started are your counterparts, which are the U.S. ambassador to that country, the foreign ambassador to the United States, and your counterpart who's chief of protocol, say in Saudi Arabia. And then you start to negotiate. You do very, very big picture stuff, and this is all in consultation with the White House. Ultimately, the White House makes all the policy calls, but you'll make a lot of the kind of the ceremonial calls. And but then that moves very quickly because our advance teams and a presidential visit advance team will arrive weeks and weeks in advance. And so that conversation at the Ritz-Carlton will absolutely happen in the weeks leading up to the event to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Ultimately, the thing about this is theater, and I really like what Ben said about it. I mean, these are flex moments. These are moments where countries flex their muscles, and we sure as hell do the same thing too. I mean, we do it. It's obviously a different style and different flavor, but I did that on the domestic side too. And the White House is the largest flex you could ever make in the world. And so and so it is, but without a doubt, the ultimate goal is to make everyone not be surprised. So everyone knows what the expectations are.
Let me ask you one more question. I want to ask Ben about something about the president and the press corps. So the United States, when you're advancing a trip overseas, I know the United States team is very demanding. We need to know every detail. No, the president's not going to like that. We need to change it. Now, sometimes if you're in Russia or Turkey, the host government, it does not necessarily do everything. But the U.S. is very demanding. When a foreign leader is coming to the United States, do they have the same prerogatives to be so demanding of the U.S., or is it a case of inequality because we're the United States of America?
Mark, we're completely exhausting is the answer to the question. So, I mean, there were rules that say COVID rules where people during the height of COVID, where you'd only get like two people in the room. The United States would get 1,000, and I'm not kidding.
But what I'm saying is am I right that when the Dutch are coming to the U.S. and having a state visit, that the Dutch advance team is just not going to be as pushy as the United States or demand, and if they are, the U.S. is going to say sorry and no. Am I right that there's
100%? Hey, look, everything's a negotiation. It's actually kind of the fun part of it.
But the U.S. is negotiating home and away from a position of strength, right?
Without a doubt, because if we pull out, the whole thing's over. They know. Look, if the country's coming to the White House for a state visit, I think what do they get? They get something like 20 invitations at a dinner of 400. If we go to a state dinner, and of course this varies from event to event, we'll probably ask for 100.
That's a great example.
That's a great metric.
A great metric to illustrate the point that I wanted to get across. Ben, totally undercovered story, and it's on your beat, so I'm acting as your assignment editor a bit, because I was in the White House a couple times, and I've watched the briefing and the way these reporters and the Correspondents Association and others are doing their jobs under the shadow of this ongoing conflict between the White House and the Correspondents Association. On this trip, the White House Correspondents Association complained that the Bloomberg, AP, and Reuters were not part of the pool on Air Force One, first time in recorded history. And I'm wondering if you think the way this trip's being covered in terms of day-to-day or the output, how much it's being covered, is affected at all by the tensions between the White House and the press corps? Or is this being covered as independent of that?
It's interesting because I think these are two totally separate things. There's this shadow boxing between the White House and the press where, I think in some sense the White House Correspondents Association had allowed itself to become totally outmoded, and it's the TV networks nobody watches, and then it's the wire services nobody reads, sort of run the show, and as though it was 30 years ago. And the White House took advantage of that and has really been beating them up. I don't think this has affected I actually don't think it's affected the coverage. The coverage of a trip like this, it's almost all images, right? Yeah. It's not. There are analytical pieces from journalists who know a lot, and I'm sure there's some at Bloomberg and other wires who are like that, but no, people are looking at the pictures, then the horses and the chanting, and that's and the big pronouncements, and that's how it's being covered.
I ask in part because we talked about this in the morning meeting. I thought the president's speech yesterday was historic, whether you agree with his foreign policy vision or not. And I thought it would be the lead story in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and it was barely covered. And it just surprised me. And I wonder if the explanation in part is that they're kind of boycotting because they're so angry.
No, I think honestly, though, that I totally agree with you that it was sort of undercovered, but I think it's just he just talks so much. He says
Yeah.
so many things,
Yeah.
and many of them are total nonsense, but then some of them are really consequential. And sometimes you get confused which is which. I also thought that was very consequential, and it was a very like well articulated statement of a foreign policy. Is it actually his foreign policy? Like, do you think that when there is a famine or when if Israel is seriously under attack or another allies under attack, we're just going to be like, you know what? We don't really get involved in this stuff. I'm not sure that is his foreign policy, but
Yeah.
it was well articulated today.
Yeah. All right. New poll from the AP asking Democrats, are you very optimistic or somewhat optimistic about their party's future? Rufus, how many Democrats do you think said somewhat or very? What percentage of Democrats would you say were combined very optimistic or somewhat optimistic?
I'm going to be very glass half empty on this one.
Yeah.
Because I think I know how I would answer the question, Mark. I bet it's 45.
45. Ben, how many Democrats did you say combined very and somewhat optimistic?
Wait, about the Democratic Party or about the country's future?
No, about the party's future.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah. 45.
Yeah, so you say 45, Ben.
25.
All right, right between you two, 33%. 33%. We've been talking here about this new Biden book, and it's an interesting story about journalism, and it's an interesting story for me, and I'm so glad Ben in particular is here. Talk about this because I think that it's the biggest scandal in journalism, American journalism history, and the authors, one of whom was very aggressive during the campaign, trying to get to the bottom of Joe Biden's obvious mental decline. And one was not. And the one who's not continues to go on TV on his own network to explain. And their position is it was not obvious that there was mental decline until after the election when they interviewed 200 people, even though it was obvious to a lot of people. And it was obvious to anchors on Newsmax that he had mental decline. And now they're saying the people who are in denial about their denial are saying, we didn't see it at the time, but they're saying, in effect, everything they said on Newsmax and Fox and elsewhere was actually true. That's basically what they're saying. But they're saying we couldn't figure it out somehow, because I guess they're saying we're not as good as the reporters at Newsmax and Fox. I guess that's what they're saying. Ben, the Washington Post has a favorable review of the book, and this sentence is in the review. Ready? I'm going to read it. Immediately, they say that what was pervaded during the Biden term was a media environment in which few reporters were willing to question the president's fitness for office. That's an extraordinary statement, but not explained. So I'll read it again. They say there was a media environment in which few reporters were willing to question the president's fitness for office. I think that's a true statement. I'm wondering if you think it's true, and if so, why were there few reporters willing to question the president's fitness?
Yeah, I am still processing what I think about this, and so I don't have a really strong theory. Like, I've tried to write about it, I questioned his fitness for office for sure, and wrote a piece about how I ran into him, and he was sort of shockingly unable just to do basic stuff. And honestly, nobody read that piece or cared. I'm glad you did, but it wasn't like I got yelled at and canceled. And the challenge, I think, it is a challenge of polarization, is that those Fox hosts and those Newsmax hosts, they were right about 30 of the 5 major Biden scandals, right?
Yeah.
Like, they were right about, there was a sea of allegations against Biden, including things that were true, but also things that were false. And we live in this hyper-polarized moment where people just absolutely dismiss, where information is processed in a totally partisan way. And I thought, I've read the excerpts, I haven't read the book. I think it's really interesting. I don't think it gets to or explains or reports that there was a cover-up. And it also doesn't quite get into like the inner Biden circle.
Yeah, it doesn't name the co-conspirators. I'm not sure you can write a book saying you're exposing a cover-up if you don't name the people who were involved with the cover-up. Seems confusing. Stick on the first.
Yeah, what's the question I'm supposed to answer? Sorry.
The question you're supposed to answer is, if the Washington Post is right that few reporters were willing to question the president's fitness, you were willing to, and I was willing to, but they assert correctly.
Yeah, did you feel you paid a professional cost for it? Because I did not, by the way. I think that the idea that there was
because they knew better than to call us and threaten us. But they did threaten a lot of reporters.
Well,
they
get
did
yelled at a lot. I don't. Yeah, maybe that's true.
Maybe, but I'm asking again. Was it the case? Was it why? If it's true, why were few reporters willing to do it?
Because my experience reporting on it, and it was, and I wrote a piece pretty late in the day when a senior, an official, I can't remember how I identified them, but however I identified them, called me up and said, like, this is crazy. Nobody will say it, but the president's really out of it. And I found myself talking to and being yelled at by, but not, I don't mean that as a bad thing. We're allowed to yell at each other, by kind of mid-senior people who themselves were not in regular contact with the president.
Right,
And my
right.
original source had said, I never see the president. I can't tell if he's reading the memos I send him. I get
Right.
presidential decisions and I can't figure out where they're coming from. And so they obviously, that little team around him created this black box around him with very, very little contact. So I do think there's something with presidential health scandals and presidential sex scandals where the bar is pretty high. It's hard to what's the piece of evidence that a reporter had and didn't report?
Well,
by the way, I'm not arguing this wasn't a huge failure.
He spoke to a dead congresswoman, and that you didn't need an inside source to see that.
Yeah, how'd you learn about that?
I have C-SPAN.
Right. From
I have
the media,
C-SPAN.
yes.
He said, well, no, I saw it on
No,
C-SPAN.
I know, you're right. There was evidence all over the place. I agree with you.
Yeah. So, Rufus, were you at the famous George Clooney fundraiser?
I was, and I was one of the 8 people in the room when this infamous moment happened.
So do you think
Rufus was in the room?
Do you think it's true that he didn't recognize George Clooney?
No, is the answer to the question. And and not only that, it's like an absurd thing. It's
So who were the 8 people in the room?
This is the most amazing part, by the way, that like the sparrow that fell was George Clooney.
It's probably a few more than 8.
Okay, well, who was in the room?
If you're counting, so if you take away Secret Service, like if you take away advanced and Secret Service,
my best sources, by the way, but okay, take them away.
Yeah, no, it's fair. George Clooney, Julia Roberts, myself, Jeffrey Katzenberg, George and Julia's agents. Probably some of their assistants. I don't remember them. The 2 finance directors. I was the finance chair, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and then like the presidential aides. The way and then President Obama and President Biden, who walked in together.
Right. So
what happens here is this: like George and Julia were standing in front. I was literally right there. George and Julia standing right in front of the curtains that get ready to just like take photos that they always do because as the presidents walk in, and then the advance guy comes in and says to President Biden and President Obama, President Biden, see George Clooney and Julia Roberts, and it was. I will say this: when I read this in the book, I was like, this did never happen. Now, I will tell you this: I am not defending the president's performance in that event. He was out of it. There is zero doubt about it. It had been a brutal, and I'm not defending. Like my brain is doing somersaults and has been for the last 8 months on this very topic, because I was certainly not with him every day, but I was with him a lot. And this whole thing is very hard for someone like me. I can guarantee you there was no cover up on my part, but I wish I had a better sense of everything that was going on than what I actually said. But I do read some of this stuff like that's in the Thompson Tapper book, and I'm like, guys, this is so salacious and ridiculous, and no one was there, so no one's gonna deny it, and it's just crazy to me. But that being said,
but hold on, I just want to clarify something. You were there, and you were standing right there. You weren't over on the side of the room, and you can say without fear of any contradiction, and you remember clearly, the president did not know. He knew who George Clooney was.
It's like not knowing who someone is in the photo line. You're introduced to them. So you're saying, Mr. President, George, this is your host, George Clooney and Julia Roberts. And he walks.
But you heard the person say that.
Yeah, he's an advanced guy. Yeah, that's what happens to every single time.
So you're saying there was no opportunity for the president not to recognize George
That's
Clooney.
Right. I mean, so George might have thought he didn't know who he was, but I mean, it just that moment didn't exist. So the scandal that is, which obviously comes from George, and this is a long.
I'd say it's from a source familiar with Clooney's thinking. I don't know that we want to say it's
okay.
Clooney,
That's fine. Yeah. But yes, I was right there.
But you're saying George Clooney, who you know well.
Yeah,
I've met him. I've met him a few times. But you're saying that the anecdote, which probably has gotten the most attention in the book, which is not told on the record, even though we know who told it, probably. You're saying unambiguously, without any reservation, that anecdote is false.
That he didn't know who he was. That moment didn't exist. He was introduced to him, Mr. President, George and Julia, and then he shook their hands. Yes,
right. Now let me ask you a question though, because I believe the account in the book is it appeared to Clooney that the president didn't know. why
Well,
would
yeah.
why would the I know the aide has to be careful with any president, but why would the aide have to introduce George Clooney and Julia Roberts?
They do that to they introduce the vice president to the president at White
No.
House events, or not
So-
the vice. No, they
no.
do actually. She is called by the Marine Guards at state dinners.
But again, I don't think your account's at odds with what's in the book. It's
Maybe
just
not.
it's just a question of whether it was apparent from the president's visage that he didn't know who Clooney was. Hard thing to sell, but
It's my point is that this is a subjective assessment, and
Right.
and I think that it is not an objective assessment.
right. Okay.
Those
but-
of us who were there, this never occurred to them that this
Right.
incident happened.
Okay, and on the question of the event itself, which you've characterized, I don't know that I've heard you say this before. Others have, but you're sharing the view of some, including some on the record in the book, who say there was something off that night with him at the event.
It was
Right.
it was a bad night. There's zero doubt.
Okay,
about
was it a bad night the way I'm having a bad night here and not doing my best hosting, or was it indicative of a decline in acuity?
I think so. I mean, if we're getting into the details of like presidential planning, this event was a disaster. So this
No, not planning. And the reason I'm
but that's
the reason-
part of it.
But
Yeah.
I understand. But the reason I'm staying with you on this is I don't know that anyone has talked about that night on the record who was backstage. I know people have talked about who were sitting in the audience, but you were privy to the backstage stuff. So
Yeah.
just speak directly to the president's performance. President Biden, what was wrong with it? Was he tired? Was he out of it?
But what I'm talking about is the onstage stuff. The backstage stuff, I mean, look, he did 3 hours of photo lines and, watched the performance and then went on stage. So what I'm talking about is the onstage stuff, not necessarily the backstage stuff, truly.
Okay.
This is why this assessment in the book is the first time I've heard anyone talk about the backstage stuff. And not
Right.
to say, look, I know there's a million people who've said they've seen him in a photo line and he's felt distant and frail. I
Yeah.
completely get that. That's different. That is different. But like that wasn't unique to this Los Angeles event. I know that people have said that before. I'm talking about the onstage performance, which was, it certainly wasn't his best.
Right. All right, Ben, I want to ask you about Jay Tapper. We're going to play a clip from him.
I want to hear more.
Go ahead.
But I want to hear more from Rufus. Like, how did you?
Go ahead. You take over.
I mean,
Ask some
how
questions.
did you, like, you say you sort of have been revisiting your own thinking. Like, do you feel like you sort of, I don't know, sort of turned yourself into his lawyer in a way and were making excuses for him through those moments when, because I think I know a lot of people like you who I trust who still say like, that wasn't my perception that he was so out of it, but now they're revisiting it. So how do you think about that now?
Then I'll give you an example. Okay. The debate was a disaster. We all know that it was a disaster. I was in Atlanta. My mindset was that I was not in debate prep. I know I've read all those stories in the last couple of months. I get it. I could not have been more excited about that debate. I thought the president was going to kill it. And that is where my mind was. So by the way, remember, this is something that like none of these journalists, and I know Jake and Alex very well. I talked to Alex for this book. That was our decision to do that. We were the ones, it was our campaign that said we want to do a debate in June because we felt like we.
But Rufus, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do want to move. I want to get everybody in. I just want to button this up with Ben's help.
I'll stop. Sorry.
The debate was a disaster. No. Please jump back in. The debate was a disaster.
Yeah.
But was it a disaster because the president was exhibiting signs of a loss of mental acuity, or some other reason that's more innocent? When you say you're rethinking the whole thing, are you rethinking whether that debate was not a one-off but a sign of a loss of mental acuity?
I think what happened there was that we saw something that, frankly, I had never seen before in that context. Certainly not.
I got to stop you, Rufus.
Yeah.
He spoke to a dead congresswoman. How can you say you had never seen it? He did it in public.
Honestly, I don't remember when that was. I do remember what you're talking about, but I don't remember the time.
But he mumbled at events. He lost his train of thought of events. He called people by the wrong name in public. But Rufus, this is what confuses me. And I don't mean to single you out.
Because then I need to push back. If you're going to call me out on that, I need to push back.
Yeah.
You also weren't there when we were on Air Force One flying home in the middle of the night, and he come home and want to have a million conversations.
Rufus, he had good moments and bad
That's right.
moments.
But that's my point.
But what I'm saying is, I don't understand it. And again, I'm only singling you out because you're here. There are people like you who say he had a lot of good moments. Of course, he did the State of the Union. And this is why I say when people on the right say Barack Obama was running the government secretly, no, There were plenty of good moments for Joe
That's
Biden.
right.
But
Yeah.
I don't understand how anyone, including you and Jake Tapper, could see the debate performance and say, oh my God, I never saw this. We all saw it. I saw it in 2017 at a book tour event he was doing. No, there was no secret about his loss of acuity. It was out there. That's why 75% of the public said no, not because of his age. They wouldn't have been troubled by his age. So how can you say, I say respectfully, how can you say you'd never seen what happened in the debate? It happened countless times in public.
It was never like that, Mark. I mean, it wasn't. And I mean, in my mind, look, I can only tell you how I feel. And I never, in my mind, I can go to my grave believing I never lied. I've never lied about this. This is how I felt sincerely. And but that debate had changed everything for a lot of us.
Okay. Ben, do you see my confusion? The debate was high profile. It was poorly timed. It was in a moment of tension, but the traits he exhibited in the debate were not new. They just weren't.
Yeah, man, but I do think, like Rufus says, like we all do see what we want to see, right? And I think what's the Orwell line? The hardest thing in the world is seeing what's in front of your face.
But irrespectively, that's not
when
what
people
Rufus
are looking
said.
for,
that's not what Rufus said. Rufus didn't say we all see what we want to see. He said, I never saw that.
Is that not what you said, Rufus?
No,
do you feel some of that?
It's totally what I said. My point is, when I said to Ben earlier, I've been doing somersaults in my brain about this, is because I don't know if I was trying to convince myself of something that wasn't there. I don't know that. I can just tell you how I felt on debate night.
Got it. All right.
And then my perception changed. Now, because I had seen, I was there too. Like I was at the State of the Union, just like I was at the debate. And then I was able to tell all the people who were saying all the stuff, look at him. That is the guy that I see so much of the time.
Right.
And again, I'm not defending this. I'm just trying to tell you from someone who is not inner circle, not full on inner circle, but was there a lot, what I saw.
Right. I'll just say one more, and if you feel you want to respond, you should. But I will say, amongst the most tactile and granular descriptions of a loss of mental acuity previous to the debate was at fundraisers, including in Manhattan, where you and I both heard from people immediately after, all three of us heard from people immediately after the fundraisers. Their description of his performance, not on camera, but their description of his performance with 20 rich people in Park Avenue was like the debate. Lost his train of thought, didn't say the right thing, didn't finish his sentence. All right, we're going to move on. Yeah. Ben, I want to show you one thing, and then I want to let everybody in. Go ahead. No, you go.
No. Look, yes, I did hear all of that. There is no doubt about it. But again, there were good moments, there were bad moments.
Yeah.
And some people thought, he was on fire sometimes, and it is, and that is just the truth.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, and then the 3.5 weeks after the debate, I mean, we were in this because I was on the front lines of this, and it was by far those 3.5 weeks, professionally and otherwise, easily the hardest 3 weeks of 3.5 hardest weeks of my professional life, without a doubt.
I bet. All right, Ben, so one more thing, then we're going to let folks in. Raise your hand if you want to get in the conversation. Until this morning, Jake Tapper's posture directly and through his publisher was, I was aggressively covering this story, and the only reason I didn't break the Biden acuity story before the election was because there was a cover-up. But they put out a video purporting to show how aggressive Jake was in pursuing the story during the election. Here's what Jake Tapper said this morning.
Conservatives now criticizing you and the media in general for how President Biden was covered during his administration.
I think some of the criticism is fair, to be honest, of me. Certainly, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. But knowing then what I know now, I look back at my coverage during the Biden years, and I did cover some of these issues, but not enough. I look back on it with humility. What we learned through our reporting is that starting in around 2019, 2020,
okay,
there were two Bidens. There was a Biden that was perfectly.
So Ben, what do you make of Jake Tapper until this morning saying, I did everything I could, I was one of the aggressive reporters on this, and now he's saying, I have humility, I could have done better?
I don't know, man. I'm not the TV anchor police.
Well, that'd be police,
but I think I do think it's a funny kind of story because like no one broke this story, right? This was just like very, very visible to a lot of people. As, by the way, were things that weren't often things that are not true are very visible to a lot of people. And
Well, Alex Thompson, his co-author, broke stories about
was
this.
was much more
Yeah.
aggressive about it. I mean, I think everybody wishes they'd covered it more, and I covered it a bit and wish I'd covered it more because it turned into the biggest story of the election.
But it's not what
I don't know.
I'm just wondering if you have a point of view of why he would go from one day saying, look at my video about how aggressive I was, to saying, I have humility, I should have done better.
I believe it's because somebody else made a video suggesting he was not that aggressive at other times, right?
Could be. All right. We'll bring folks in. Thank you both. We'll bring folks in. Celia, welcome in. He also has a very, very skilled public relations advisor. Maybe that's something to do with it.
Who is that?
Risa Heller, who you know well.
Absolutely. Totally. Yeah, I have no idea who that is. No idea.
Not you, Celia. Ben knows Risa. Celia, welcome in.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are. Questions for Rufus and Ben, please.
Yeah, so I'm in East Tennessee in Knoxville, kind of gathering my thoughts. A little frustrated, Mark. I think I've been on with you before. I'm sure you can understand kind of where I'm coming from. Um, so one thing I see referenced often in my Twitter feed, but I remember was in April of 2023, there was a press conference on the White House lawn where Biden was photographed holding a printout with a reporter's name, a photo, where they came from, and the question they would be asking. And I have never seen anyone from the media address that. And I think, Mark, you've covered this very well, especially in the past few weeks leading up to books being released. And I do think most of the blame goes to White House staffers, people that were around Biden. I find it fascinating hearing from people in his cabinet that say that they don't remember seeing anything that would lead to them believing that he had any mental decline, which at that point just indicts them because then the cabinet wasn't meeting enough. But I've never seen anyone address that. So that, I don't remember that being, a single instance. I think you can go back to the press conference. The question did line up with the card that was printed out.
Yeah.
So who takes accountability?
Right. For the president being fed the questions. Is that what you're asking?
But the press fed the questions.
Right. Okay.
So then I worry kind of that there's no accountability being taken.
Great question. So Ben, how common is it for a White House to try to get the questions?
Yeah, actually, I saw that story and was actually probably felt basically the way you do. Like, that's crazy. That's not how it's supposed to work. And I don't really know what happened in that specific case. The other thing that happened very similarly was when he was doing some urban radio during the campaign. It emerged that they'd been writing the questions basically for radio interviews. I don't know. It seems like it was a fairly widespread practice with this White House. We did an interview, something about a YouTube show that Pete Buttigieg had gone on, and his team had required that certain elements be removed before it aired, and which just feels like a very strange and, among other things, wildly old-fashioned way to relate with the media. But I do think you're right that they were just obviously avoiding putting Biden in unscripted situations at all times. I actually don't know. I can't remember the details of that specific story well enough to give you an answer, but obviously you shouldn't do that. If you're a journalist.
Rufus, do you want to address this?
Unfortunately, and I in no way dodging the question, it just was never even close to my lane. So I was never part of that. And I was never dealing with the press at all.
Celia, the only thing I'll say is every administration does this. They call the reporters and say, hey, if we called on you, what would you ask? The Biden White House did it in a more structured and specific way, but it's not they're not the only ones who've done something like that. Because they're trying to keep the boss from embarrassing himself. So thank you. Grateful to you. Just to be clear, folks, you can ask about anything you want. You don't have to ask about Joe Biden or the Biden White House. You can ask about the Qatari plane or whatever you wish. David, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind, please. There you go. Oh, sorry. One more time, David.
Get myself again.
There you go.
Well, I did want to talk about the Trump speech, but just to get back to Biden for 1 minute. With all due respect to Rufus, even if we go with yes, there were good days and there were bad days. First of all, a lot of us out here far, far from DC saw this story very clearly for a year or two before Biden withdrew, and it was just obvious to so
And
many.
just to be clear, David lives where Ben lives in Brooklyn, USA, and David is slightly
We
to the
call
left.
it real America. We call it.
David is slightly to the left of AOC.
I'm slightly to the left of people who are slightly to the left of AOC.
Yeah. Okay. So David, continue about your experience.
No, but I was going to say, even if we credit what Rufus has said, I have, with all due respect, I'm crediting Rufus with Rufus's view of, there were good days and bad days, and you could look at it from one angle, from the State of the Union angle, or from another angle. But what was it that was so valuable about the political skills of Joseph Robinette Biden that the whole country had to take a flyer on the possibility that he could maybe, do some work in a second term, not necessarily be cogent all the way to the end of it. It seems to me that shows a remarkable contempt for us in the Democratic electorate and the electorate generally, that they just
David,
good
good
them
question.
out there,
Yeah.
and let the chips fall where they may. But the chips were already falling, as far as I could see.
Okay. David, thank you. Rufus.
Look, I am speaking as honestly as I know to this group of people, and I know that folks are going to disagree with me on it. I can just tell you I'm speaking everything that I know as honestly as I can, and I understand people feel differently, and that is the truth. And I always tried to do that from the very beginning moment I started working in it. Well, I've been around for a long time now, and I've always tried to do that. That's why I'm agreeing to talk about it right now. And I'm sorry if folks like me let folks down. I am. That's one of the reasons why I have undergone this process. I have been called the nastiest words in the English language based on these conversations, when it just wasn't real.
Right.
But
Let me be clear.
I'm
I'm not calling you a liar.
I know you're not. I know you're
I'm
not.
calling the system as a whole one that seems to value incumbency more than
Yeah.
Look, I hear you.
competence.
I mean, this is I'll comment on that. I think the reason why I don't know if we've talked about this much, but this is my belief that in 2022 during the midterms, Democrats overperformed. There was this perception that there was going to be a red wave, House Senate going to go big. I think if that had happened, there would have been a strong movement even inside the Biden inner circle to say that he shouldn't run for re-election. The opposite happened. I was not there then, admittedly. I was not part of any of those conversations. I cannot speak to it firsthand, and I want to be real clear about it. What happened was we overperformed. Democrats overperformed. The Biden White House overperformed. That led to a sort of swagger and chip on your shoulder that I think was unhelpful. And I think that's ultimately what happened. Again, I was not there for that, but that is what I believe happened with it's sort of secondhand information, not firsthand information.
Ben, either response to David or question for Rufus.
No,
or neither. Okay, David, I'll say this is one way I think about it, and I think you're going to be in my category. On the night of the debate, I got lots of texts and saw on social media, this is shocking. I can't believe this is happening. I think, David, you share my view of no surprise at all. And no surprise at all on debate night. I wouldn't have least bit shocked that happened because I'd seen him since 2017 exhibit all those same traits.
He just was out in the open at that point.
Yeah. But
although you said you'd seen him since when?
2017. 2017.
Yeah, it's funny because he ran for president in 2020.
Yeah, I remember that. And
it's funny. And this was litigated this was a big issue in that campaign. And I don't know, can we blame the Democratic electorate at all here? Like they had a bunch of young, vital, they had is anyone more physically fit than Cory Booker in America? Like,
he had a lot of good moments. He had a lot of good moments.
But it's interesting. Democratic voters certainly did. Deliver Joe Biden to us at an advanced stage.
I'll tell this story. I've told it on this show, on this platform many times, but I'm going to keep telling it until I've told everyone. And Ben at least hasn't heard it. I saw him do an event in 2017. And after the event, he was on a stage with about 900 people, a very friendly interviewer. And after the event, I said to my wife, thank goodness he's out of public life, because just in time, because he was vice president a year ago. And now he's glassy-eyed, he's confused, he can't follow the easy questions. And I said, the only thing that troubles me is that his family is letting him go on this book tour. He shouldn't go on this book tour. He can't handle book tour questions. That was 3 years before he ran for president the first time. And I'm no like genius about Joe Biden, but it was apparent to me in 2017 that, you know, he had some bad days. So
yeah, and you probably would have thought he couldn't win the Democratic nomination and then govern the country for 4 years, right?
I did not. But then when I saw Bernie Sanders rise up, I thought, well, somebody's going to have to stop him. And Barack Obama, this story's still never been written. Barack Obama got Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar out of the race. First time in my knowledge in American history, a candidate, let alone two, left a presidential nomination fight with money in the bank and a chance to be the nominee. Never seen anybody do that, but those two.
Pete and Amy were never going to be the nominee. All they would have done was be a spoiler for Biden.
Well, probably, but they had a chance to be. It was not impossible they could be the nominee. If Bernie, let's say they hadn't gotten out and their staying in would have allowed Bernie to win California. Okay, the establishment would have had one last gasp, right? Biden would have been knocked out. Bloomberg was out. The establishment would not have Bernie wouldn't have just rolled from Super Tuesday on. And it would have been Amy Klobuchar or Pete Buttigieg.
I think that's revisionist history, Mark. That was after Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday, Biden overperformed in a massive way, and Pete and Amy did nothing nothing on Super Tuesday.
Didn't they get out right before Super Tuesday? I'm pretty sure they did. I'm pretty sure that they had to get out before Super Tuesday, or Bernie would have won California. That's what happened. Obama said to them, "You have to get out, or Bernie's going to win California, and he's going to be on a runaway train." Again,
that is ultimately what that is true. Yeah, I mean, this was a counter Bernie play for sure.
I think one of them would have been the Bernie alternative, and they chose to get out of the race. So when you say the Democrats chose Biden won it. He won it under very extraordinary circumstances that required the intervention of Barack Obama, I believe. Anyway, gentlemen, so grateful to you for being here. Rufus, are you quoted on the record in the book?
I don't know. I don't know that they'd ever interviewed anybody on the record, honestly.
Well, David Plouffe on the record, one of the Pod Save America guys on the record. So they did interview some people on the record.
Oh, they did? No, I don't believe I'm on. I actually have not. Okay. I have not read the book.
All right, so
I'm not reading any of these books.
So Ben, if we're trying to get the 200 people identified, where we got 199 to go. Thank you both again. Ben, I don't know that we clarified where and when can people listen to Mixed Signals, and what's it about? Your podcast.
They can get it anywhere they get their podcasts, from YouTube to all the podcast places, Apple, Spotify, and it's about the media. It's about the kind of this weird moment in media that we are currently literally embodying. What is happening?
And what day does it drop, as the kids say?
Oh, every Friday. It's every Friday morning.
Friday morning. And what kind of guests do you have?
We had last few guests, Piers Morgan, Ezra Klein, have a guy named Chris Black, host of the podcast How Long Gone this week, which is a slightly more niche favorite. Had Vivek Ramaswamy, lots of people at the intersection of media and politics.
Rufus, little known fact, what's on my bucket list to get booked on Mixed Signals? We'll see. We'll see if I can pull it off. No, I'm serious. They interview a lot of people who are considered to be kind of Sherpas for the future of the media, and I aspired it in my own small way to be that. Rufus, we look forward to the advent of your company in full force, and keep us posted. And both of you, please come back regularly. We loved having you on.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you, Rufus.
All right. So let me tell you about a few things. Michael Moynihan show. I know. I have a put up that graphic because that'll remind me what I'm supposed to say about that, because I'm currently stumped. Oh yes, this show is about to debut, or no? This is tomorrow night, right? Tomorrow night. Thank you very much, Joshua Citarella of Doom Scroll. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Before then, tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern time, Sean, Dan, and I will be here. This show will be on in 23 hours, and also dropping tomorrow is my podcast Next Up on the Megyn Kelly Network, and my guests are Charlie Kirk and Meghan McCain. So please join me for that. You can watch it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Same place you get Ben's podcast, exact same place. That's where you can get my podcast. Very grateful to you all for joining. Thanks for those who asked questions and raised your hands. And I'll see you at 9 a.m. Eastern Time with Sean and Dan. Have a good night.